Welcome back. Today we're joined by Professor Dr. Anicia Peters, CEO of the National Commission on Research, Science and Technology, who recently represented Namibia on the global stage at 3 high-profile artificial intelligence events in Paris: the AI Science and Society Conference, the Paris AI Action Summit, and the African AI Village. Her participation not only placed Namibia at the center of global AI discourse, but also highlighted our country's growing commitment to innovation, ethics, and inclusion in emerging technologies. Professor Peters now joins us this evening. Thank you so much for being here with us. Let's delve into your experience, of course, in Paris, and also the event that you attended in Rwanda, and unpack this discussion. To start with, what was the overall focus of the 3 AI events that you attended in Paris, and why were they significant for Namibia?
Well, maybe a precursor to that event is that within Africa we have quite a number of AI sort of activities that's going on. Like, for instance, we had the Continental AI Strategy being launched. I am the co-chair for the Africa 4IR working group under the Africa Scientific Research and Innovation Council under the AU. And we are also working on strategies and building up expertise across Africa. So then the Smart Africa and the AU and ITU are working on an Africa AI Council, very high level. And I was, together with MICT, sort of part of that, because all of the African countries have to be part of it. So then this was a precursor to the Paris event. So when we went to Paris, Africa was noticeably absent. And I have to thank the French embassy for facilitating the invitations for Namibians, because we were actually about 5 or 6 who were invited. And so when we went there, the conference on AI, society, and science was a scientific conference and looking at research from different countries, but notably Africa was absent. And during this time, for instance, there's a lot of research going on because of the AI models. And, you know, some call it the existential threat, and some call it that we have to mitigate. And I'm one of the people who is going in for a human-centered approach and human augmentation to AI. You can't leave it alone, right, to do as it pleases. So, for instance, it was interesting to see the deception that AI models are actually capable of. This is generative AI models are capable of deliberately lying.
Wow.
So very interesting, you know, all of the research on trustworthy and safe systems. And then, of course, the Action Summit in Paris was global. And that saw sort of an AI global fund that was established, but also strengthening of scientific research into AI, especially because of the fears, you know, on safety of AI systems. So they've launched that very massive sort of fund that was going on, 2.6 billion that they've euros that they've essentially launched then. And they've also launched the scientific report on the threats and advances and safety of AI and the risks.
Right.
Then we had, so Africa was notably absent at this forum, right? We were invited, but we were not really sitting at the table.
Right.
And so Carla, that we also work closely with in Kenya, then organized this sort of the entire Africa AI Village, where we had African ICT ministers and we had scientists and researchers like ourselves and councils being represented. And then we looked at issues specifically pertaining to Africa and within our own African context. So that was sort of what happened at the Paris summit. Then subsequently, remember we were working on the Africa AI Council. So subsequently we had the AI summit on Africa in Rwanda on the 3rd and the 4th. And it was obviously very well attended by heads of state, you know, and very important people. I quickly want to touch on the significant outcomes from that, because that was very significant, more significant than the one that we had for the African continent. For the world, the Paris one was significant, but for Africa, the Rwanda one was significant. And we had, for instance, seen that a $60 billion fund for AI for Africa has been established. And that will support AI innovators, entrepreneurs, and AI development across the continent. There was also, of course, the announcement of the AI Africa Council. Then there was also an Africa Scientific AI panel. So I've expressed interest that we, as NCRST, we will join that scientific panel as well. There's also, it wasn't announced then, but there's also the Pan-African AI Research Center that we will also be partaking in. Then they also have, in terms of the declaration, of course, there is also the African markets to open up for AI, where, for instance, we would like to source directly first from African countries like Namibia before we source from elsewhere in the world. So there's a talent pipeline, so the AI, skills that we have to develop across Africa. And then there was also there was a very significant announcement, and that is the development of compute infrastructure. Right. So AI needs specifically compute infrastructure. It's very energy intensive and it needs GPUs, etc. And only 5% of African researchers in AI currently have access to compute infrastructure, to GPUs. So Cassava Technologies have actually announced that they are building the first Africa AI smart what do they call it? Factory. Right. The first AI factory where we will have the compute infrastructure. But it was not only that they are building the first one, they actually announced that they are building 5, right? 5 across Africa. Yes. So that is very interesting because you can have all of the talent in the world, regulations, etc. But if you don't have the compute infrastructure, which is what we are struggling with, you can't do much. So that was quite exciting. Another exciting thing was, so I was speaking and participating also in the AI research colloquium that was taking place. And the Africa AI Talent Index was launched. And Namibia featured number 14. You mentioned that, and I was so shocked. Number 14 out of 54 countries. Wow. On the AI Talent Index. And what criteria were they looking at in electing and placing these countries? So they looked at, for instance, of course, talent. What activities are we doing? Is it at our universities? Are we offering sort of AI and machine learning formal courses? Are we offering digital learning platforms? Then they were also looking at institutions. They were looking at regulations. Of course, Namibia didn't score too well because we don't have an AI strategy. Correct. We don't have AI policies. We do not even have data protection policies in place. So we didn't score too well on that, but we scored. But our score was still good because we have strong institutions. That's what the report says. Right. So, even if you don't have the regulations, the institutions are there to sort of, safeguard and look after, AI concerns and harms, etc. And then, of course, we also scored well on infrastructure. So infrastructure was a little bit two-sided for Namibia. We did not score high on electricity because so much of the country is not connected. So there our score was rather low. But we scored well in terms of, I think 61% of Namibians are actually, connected to the internet, have internet access, and so, or internet users rather. So on those type of things, we scored quite well, and that brought up our score. But yes, I was amazed because they launched it and I haven't seen the report before, and I was like, what? And they are showing it on the screen, and I said, wow, that's amazing.
Well, a lot of the world still looks at Africa as a developing player within the AI sector. Do you, with what you've just said, I don't think I can concur with those sentiments.
Africa is on the rise in terms of AI, because we want to have an inclusive, trustworthy, responsible, and human-centered and Africa-centered AI development. And this is what the Rwanda Summit was also all about, because we want to affirm those values. But AI is also your catalyst for instance, very big areas such as in terms of poverty reduction. You know, it's really a catalyst for agriculture, water, energy, healthcare, you know, biodiversity, even international relations. There are so many fields. It like touches everything, broadcasting, tourism. So there's so much you can do. There's also a lot of job creation, you know, activities. And you know what? One of the things in terms of talent is that the youth already there. It's like they're born ready, right? You know, like they come from buttons heaven. Now I would say they come from AI heaven. But we need to get our educators, our politicians, our decision makers, you know, the bosses of the companies. We have to get them sort of on board. But and then, of course, we have to mitigate the harms, because there are some harms and unintended consequences. So it is up to us to mitigate that, especially, you know, in terms of scientific research that we have to do, and that we need to build in Namibia. So in Namibia, NCRST is active on the AI front. We have funded, for instance, last year, 7 grants, and those grants, of course, we solicited external funding, but those grants were actually in food security, in water, in energy, and in several areas, healthcare, but we actually said you need to integrate AI into that. And so except for funding the grants, and this will continue, we will continue funding it, we also fund AI innovators. So AI innovation we fund, and then we are also doing the AI readiness assessment. We just had a validation workshop I was just reviewing all of the inputs from all of the stakeholders in Namibia. And you know what? Sometimes we think that we are behind. And then you start to read all of the activities that are going on in Namibia, right? With our entrepreneurs, with our startups. And you suddenly realize we're not that behind. We are behind in certain things, like, for instance, an AI strategy, we want to build an AI institute. But we really want to make sure that AI benefits our communities, you know, and our economic spheres.
Yeah, of course. Well, unfortunately, we're running out of time. But just lastly, perhaps you can talk to us about the opportunities that you foresee for Namibia in the global AI ecosystem.
Well, with Namibia, but it's, you know, sometimes it's important that we are present, number one, because if we are absent, those conversations happen without us. NCRST is, for instance, a member of the International Science Council as well. And then when I saw there was an AI group, right, they then invited me, and the Global Research Councils as well. They also have a dedicated AI group. You know what? There's funding opportunities. Like right now for ISC, for International Science Council, there's a lot of funding opportunities for AI in innovation, AI in research. But we have to unlock that potential and that funding for Namibia as well. But Namibia also needs to drive conversations in terms of how do we mitigate the risk. You know, job losses, youth unemployment. If you look at the statistics, because I had to make a slide on it when I presented, Southern Africa has the highest youth unemployment rate, the highest. And who's leading? South Africa and Namibia. So, and that's what we need to use AI for. We need to use it to unlock the potential of our youth and solve some of our youth unemployment problems. But we need to facilitate that for them by making available resources.
100%. Well, thank you so much, Professor. And every time you're here, there's just not enough time to discuss this topic, but we appreciate you being with us this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
That was Professor Anicia Peters speaking to us there. It's almost time to say goodbye. We'll be right back.